Hello, my name is Danni Watts-Jones of DWJ Wealth Management. I'm with Allison Kent today from JCP Solicitors. Thanks for joining us for our discussion about trusts and how they can support people with tax planning and help them provide for their loved ones. This is part of a three-part series, so please watch the others for more details on making trusts work for you.
I think there's lots of misconceptions as to what a trust actually is. I think they're most commonly thought of as something that wealthy families set up for their children. You know, you hear about children that go off into the world with a trust fund to help them. And of course they are used for that. But a trust, really, the simplest way of explaining it is that it's a way of managing assets, whether that's money, property, investments, for somebody else. And there's lots of reasons why you would set those up. And I think clients don't realise that actually we come across trusts very often in our lives, and very often clients have got trusts and they just don't even realise that they've got them. For example, they may have bought a property with another person, and as soon as you do that, a trust automatically comes into play. If you've set up a savings account for a child, a trust fund comes into effect. And the idea of a trust is not a complicated concept. I mean, you've essentially just got three sets of people. You've got the settlor, that's the person who puts the money or the property into the trust. You've got the trustees, they are the people who look after that money or property in the trust. And you've got the beneficiaries, and they are the people who will benefit from that. So, you know, sometimes the settlor and the trustee are the same person. Sometimes the trustees and the beneficiaries are the same people, but they have three different roles.
I think that's a great explanation in terms of who's involved within the trust. And I always try and say to my clients, remember in three ways. Beneficiary is benefit. Settler is the person who sets the trust up, and the trustee is the person that you trust. And I think that's a great explanation of who's involved and why we need them along the way. So when we're looking at trusts and trusts that are being used, which are the ones that are used generally more from a legal perspective?
They're used in wills very often. We find, particularly if you are looking to benefit a child, obviously the child under 18 can't legally accept that money or property for themselves. So what you would do is you would appoint a trustee in the will, and that person then would look after the money. So typically grandparents might do that for their grandchildren. Also, sometimes you may think, well, yes, a child can own money or property at 18, but in the vast majority of cases, that's not really a very wise decision. 18-year-olds don't tend to make the best decisions when it comes to money. Obviously, there are some that will, but I think it's important for us to appreciate that young people can need a bit of guidance, shall we say. And, you know, commonly when we are setting up wills for clients, we'll say to them, you know, do you want this child to benefit at 18, or would you rather say that they have to be older than that? So typically they may put in a stipulation that the child has to be 21 or 25, and then you've got the trustees just guiding them a little bit. So that's probably the most common type of trust that we see. And also tax planning using trusts, that's quite common. You may want to pass money on to your children and grandchildren, but you may want to retain some control over how that money is used, or you want to be able to pass it to them maybe, you know, when they get a little bit older and a little bit wiser. So you can set up trusts during your lifetime as well. Grandparents sometimes set up trusts for things like school fees or university fees and that sort of thing. But the other thing with trusts is that they can have a protection for vulnerable beneficiaries. So you may have children who are over 18 or maybe, you know, older than that. But for whatever reason, they are not best placed in their lives to actually manage money and property. For some people, they may have problems with addiction. And that's, you know, you wouldn't necessarily want to leave a lump sum of money to that person, because it's probably going to cause them more damage than good. We act for lots of parents who have children with disabilities that maybe won't get to the stage in life where they will be able to manage their finances for themselves. Then you are looking at setting up a trust that maybe will last for the whole of that child's lifetime. And that's really quite important for parents, that they know that there's going to be somebody there who's going to be keeping an eye on the situation. And every child is different. Every child's needs will be different. And the trust has got to be tailored, and the trustees are going to be, you know, the right people to be able to manage assets for those children. So moving on to the sort of more complicated sort of arrangements in a will are where clients will come in to see me and they may say, typically, if I die first, I want everything to go to my wife, husband, partner, whatever. That tends to be what I'd say 99% of couples say to me. My answer to that is, fine, we can do that. How do you feel about the possibility that after your death, your partner may meet somebody else and the money may go to that person and maybe not on to the children or other beneficiaries that you ideally would want to benefit? And then they usually have a sort of sharp intake of breath and will say, ooh, actually, I'm not comfortable with that. I want to know that if, for example, if I leave assets to my husband, that he will eventually then pass those assets on to the children. And there's an easy answer to that, is that rather than giving your assets outright to your partner, you can set up a trust in the will. What you're doing with that is you're saying, I want to provide for my partner, but I want to know where those funds are going to end up when he or she dies. And I think that's really quite an important thing for people to think about when they're making a will.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's peace of mind for the family that it's going down the bloodline. That's where we have most of our tax planning and trust implementations, is where they want to go down the bloodline. And what would you say your most common type of trust is that you'd use as a solicitor?
I'd say that arrangement, really.
Yeah. Okay.
What we'd call it is a flexible life interest trust, if you want the legal term for it.
Fantastic.
But essentially it's just saying, I will set up a trust in the will, my partner will be a beneficiary of that trust, my children and grandchildren will also be beneficiaries of that trust. And then you appoint trustees who very often will be the partner and the children, and maybe a third party sometimes involved.
Absolutely.
And you then leave what's called a letter of wishes with that will to say, this is what I actually want you to do. Typically you'd say, I want my partner to be able to live in the house for as long as they want to. I want them to have all of the income that comes in on any investments I've got. But on their death, I want that to come back over and go to the children.
And would you say there would be any scenarios where you needed, or for example, the client needed to break the trust? Is there the availability of doing that?
Well, as far as a will trust is concerned, obviously that doesn't come into effect until
death.
The client dies anyway.
Yes.
And again, that's something we have to sort of reassure clients about, because sometimes they think it comes into effect straight away. It doesn't. It comes into effect when you die, as a normal will would. The sort of trusts that I use for that sort of planning are extremely flexible.
Brilliant.
So the trustees can make provision for any of the beneficiaries in any way at any time. The important thing with that is that you choose trustees who you are 100% happy with. Hence the term trustees.
Trustees, absolutely. Absolutely.
Particularly with a will trust, because by its very nature, when it comes into effect, you're not going to be around.
Well, hopefully everyone's found that useful today, our little brief and whistle-stop tour of why trusts are important as part of your legal and your financial planning. Thank you for your time today. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Many thanks for joining us today. If you want to learn more about how trust can work for you, please keep an eye on DWJ Wealth Management and JCP Solicitors, social media and YouTube channels.